Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. Now, as some of you probably know, I'm on vacation right now. But as you can probably tell, I'm currently sitting on my couch where I normally film most of my reviews in my apartment in Toronto. Funny story about that, I basically had all my flights down to the States canceled and then rebooked in a way that was just not gonna work, so no New York City trip for me. But at the same time, I'm not gonna let that get me down. I'll talk a little bit more about this later in the video, but at the same time, I kind of still want to do my own thing, do my regularly scheduled vacation reviews. And so these videos, I'm gonna try to have a bit of a vacation at home here, try to knock through a bunch of different reviews in a little bit more of a handheld, casual setting. Hope you guys enjoy it, but hey, we got 4 on the docket. Let's get started. Look, you guys all know my opinions on Lily Allen. I haven't exactly been kind to her many times in the past. And for good reason, really. I've always found her writing to be kind of undercooked for the level of snideness that she brings to the table. I've talked about all this before. Go watch my Sheezus review 4 years ago. But the funny thing about Sheezus is that Lily Allen herself has kind of decried it. She's not exactly a fan of where that went. And for a future record, she decided to drop Greg Kurstin as her producer and go off in her own distinctive direction for this album. And from the amount of personal struggles that she's had, you can tell this record is actually a fair bit better. She's had the opportunity to refine her subject matter a little bit better. She's a little bit more mature for once. She's a little bit more self-aware, which I can appreciate. It does elevate the writing to passable, and for once it actually sounds like she mostly cares about what she's singing about. And for once, I actually kind of appreciate her stepping up to the microphone. There's more that I like on this album than I outright don't. The problem's the production. I'm sorry, there's no way around it. There's no way around how desaturated, woefully out of date so much of the production is, especially when it comes into some of the rap features, the tropical bounce, the desaturated synth lines, the air horns. I'm sorry, it sounds out of date. It has no momentum whatsoever, and it really makes the album feel incredibly listless and honestly just kind of forgettable. I wish I liked it more, folks, but even going back to it after I had planned to put this on the trailing edge weeks ago, yeah, nothing really to it. I'm thinking 5 out of 10. Check it out if you're a fan, but beyond that, I wouldn't bother.
Like I've done 1,000 times before. Why don't you show me I'm worth more? Till you love me like I'm leaving.
Man alive, this was a complete disappointment. Look, I like Sugarland's first 2 albums. I think a lot of country fans, or at least pop country fans, like Sugarland's first 2 albums. But with every additional record they put out, they've doubled down on these gummy, ugly layers of synthesizers and percussion that just does not fit all together all that well. And thus when they broke up and Jennifer Nettles started putting out her solo work that, yes, had similar elements and yet handled them way better, I was completely fine with that. But let's ask the question, does this album exist for any reason other than the fact that Sugarland has some name recognition left and Jennifer Nettles' solo records aren't quite getting the acclaim they deserve? And the problem about this is that this didn't have to suck. There's some decent pedal steel, there's some warmer organic instrumentation, and yeah, Jennifer Nettles is a really good singer. I know her vocal tone isn't for everybody, but I still like her sound. And you know what? There are a couple moments that have some genuine sweetness. I'm not altogether wild about a lot of the songwriting. I think it's a little bit shallow, but it's pop country. You run with it, and even if there are a couple songs that could have afforded to hit a little bit harder, you get what you can get. And I think they turned out pretty well for pop country. But there's no way around it. There are definitely songs here that do not work, and a lot of that comes back to the production. The synthesizer blending, especially how gummy and plastic and sticky that it feels, it does not sound good. And what's all the worse here is that it's paired with hooks that should make this better, and performances where Jennifer Nettles tries to rap. Yeah, she really does that. It's about as cringeworthy and embarrassing as you would expect. And look, I might be one of those guys who actually praised her solo work a lot more than a lot of other people, and I'll stand by that for the record, but this should be better than it is. The production doesn't really hold up. and despite a couple good hooks, it can't save how plastic this feels and how much of a cash grab that it really nakedly is. Light 5 out of 10. So I'm not much of a storytime YouTuber. I've never claimed to be, mostly because I'm operating under the principle that I don't think my regular, ordinary life is all that interesting. But I do have something to say surrounding the whole vacation incident that I had from yesterday. And it starts off with this. I don't blame Air Canada for this. Not entirely. I don't blame the people as a part of it, because the people honestly can't do a lot. When you have thunderstorms, planes can't land, airports are going to have to deal with canceled flights. And keep in mind that Air Canada loses about $1 million every single flight they have to cancel. When it comes to refunds, when it comes to refueling, when it comes to maintenance, it's a total mess. So I don't have that much anger when it comes to the people who have to deal with angry passengers like myself. That sucks for everybody. And that's why I tried to maintain as much patience as I possibly could. So I'm not going to completely astroturf what's going on with Air Canada there. Not completely. Because the problem is that there are ways this could have been rectified through better scheduling systems, through predictive analytics. Keep in mind, I work in the data industry outside of my music critic stuff, so there could have been ways this could have been fixed. This could have worked. If they had prioritized, let's say, predictive scheduling to say, okay, these are the flights that are going to have to be canceled. Based upon our data, based upon these trends and patterns, this is how we can reroute them and rebook them. Now, they currently have systems that do this, and I was automatically rebooked for a flight on the Sunday. That's right, the Sunday, which means I would have only had a single half day effectively in New York. So what was the point of me going on vacation after that? So there are ways you can improve these systems. You buy into greater data processing. You input more power into machine learning. There are ways you could have improved the system and make everybody's lives better. Or make this even easier, focus on the customer experience. Focus on being able to actually speak to the people, offer some ideas surrounding the rebooking process. Make it someone straightforward so I have to go through 6 different customer support desks, the online portal, and their advice center. Most of which I will say there's the social media presence, which is clearly being managed by about 7 or 8 different people, just was not cohesive. And they only really started to seriously respond to me when I started getting negative. And really, you don't want to do that. Or when I started getting that heated on social media, I didn't want to have to do that. But again, I'm out a considerable amount of money because I couldn't do that. Hopefully full refunds will be passed along. I could hope that. But here's the thing. It all struck to me as a larger issue with regards to systemic issues rather than people issues. If the systems had been improved, if the systems had been revised or more finely tuned, this would not be as much of an issue. The problem is that dealing with systemic fixes is hard when it's much more easy to spend money to nickel and dime your customers and by tacking on so many additional fees than any sort of larger systemic fixes to fix the long-term issues when you lose $1 million per canceled flight. Well, that's where you could enact a much more sizable change, but honestly, that requires a sort of manpower and investment that most airlines can't justify preemptively. It says a lot about a culture that they prioritize broken systems rather than the people living within them. And I'm going to quote ContraPoints. If you haven't watched a lot of her stuff, you really should, but I'll quote her here. Are people there to serve the economy, or is the economy there to serve the people? I know a bit of a monologue there, but let's get back to regular reviews. I think I got a few left. Let's go.
Take a bite and feel satisfaction guaranteed. I'm your sunshine, whoa. I'm gonna burn down your parade. I'm a shooting star that wish you never made.
Alright, look, whenever I have an artist like NateWantsToBattle show up on my schedule, I'm always a little bit reticent, and I typically am when it comes to any YouTube-driven artist. It's not that the aesthetic doesn't work for me, but rather when they start making original music, especially coming from covers to doing what he's doing now, I'm always a little hesitant because I saw what happened to Carmen, and this tends to happen more often than not when you have artists that are coming from the very unique design style and aesthetic of YouTube get kind of eaten alive by the music industry. Now, thankfully, with NateWantsToBattle, yes, a lot of his stuff is very overproduced, but at the same time, there's enough core of genuine personality that even if you do have some overproduction and some really overwritten lyrics, it doesn't always connect, but it works more often than it doesn't. And thus, for a second record, Paid in Exposure, I'll say it, it's a genuine improvement. Hell, it's the better Panic at the Disco album than the Panic at the Disco album that we got. But moving beyond that, I think that there's a lot more guitars, there's more of a firmer rock element, which I really appreciate. Yeah, it's overmixed and there's more trap percussion and really just fake percussion that I would otherwise like. And yeah, if you're really gonna delve into the lyrics, they can feel overwritten, a little too sentimental, a little melodramatic at points, especially with as much pot shots as he tries to take at the industry, and none of it's especially all that original, although there is a couple songs where he's taking the perspective of the devil within the industry, trying to take advantage of him, and that's actually a nifty play on that whole idea. I think there are good ideas within this record. Unfortunately, kind of runs out of steam by the end of the album. I don't think all the grooves quite pay off, and the writing might be a shade overwritten for its own good. For as much as this album nakedly imitates Panic at the Disco, which could also be an issue if Panic at the Disco hadn't dropped probably their worst record to date, I would be more critical there, but as it is still catchy as sin. NateWantsToBattle is only improving as a vocalist in terms of personality. I'm not sure he's at Brendan Urie's level, but very few people are. But at the same time, I actually think this is pretty nice. It's overall pretty good. It shows somebody from the YouTube space operating in a derivative genre at this point, but doing enough to make it distinctive and interesting, and having enough talent within his lane regardless. So I'm thinking, yeah, light 7 out of 10. Check this out, it's worth it.
I wanna kiss you till I can't get off your mind. Girl, I wanna be what keeps you up at night. Yeah.
You know, I'm a little bit surprised this wound up as high out of my schedule as it did, and the fact that so many people were voting for it. I mean, I've covered Dan Shay twice already, and I guess they've had the most success they've ever had thanks to Tequila, but at the same time, I always struggle with their reviews of their album because there really isn't a lot to say. They tend to get a lot of shit from the traditional country set or the indie country set for being the boy bandification of country, and I honestly have never really hated their music. They play to a very specific, almost adolescent niche when it comes to teenage girls making the specific sound. So in that brand of pop country, it's pretty easy to ignore, and frankly, they've got decent harmonies, they sound good behind the microphone, and they have a penchant for more organic production, which I do appreciate. The problem comes with this record, and this is something I've always been worried about with Dan and Shay, is that they would double down on more of the pop influences instead of the country, and that's where I think this record actually stumbles a little bit, and might just be their weakest to date, because let's be honest, there are good songs. Their album starts effectively pretty strong. Sure, it's more in the atmospheric lane, it's more on the poppy side, but there's still a lot of organic percussion, they sound great together, the songs are a little bit more melancholic, which is actually a decent lane for them, and in the third song they get a little bit more of, I like to say a Chris Stapleton vibe, even though none of them are even close to that particular lane in terms of their delivery, but I appreciate the groove, it's a little bit more soulful, it's a good step for them. But then deeper into the track listing you get the pop songs, and I'm going to call them pop songs because that's what they are. They really pivot towards a Shawn Mendes mold, the percussion gets a lot stiffer, they pivot out of the country mold, and really that's what I think has the greatest strength for them. They also have some songs about women where, let's just say these are not the guys you want to have making songs about complicated or troubled relationships. They just aren't all that good in that lane. And the sad fact is I wish this was better. It's not bad by any means, but it's also not really all that great, not really all that interesting. I'm inclined to say light 6 out of 10. Check it out if you're curious, but again, I think this is their weakest to date, and it's the weakest because they've compromised so much of the country influence instead of the pop. So take it as it is. Beyond that, well, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know this is a little bit different than I normally do in terms of my typical reviews, and I think for the next couple reviews, I'm going to try and knock out the 4 of the time that I've been doing before, but we'll see how things go. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.